Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad you all could join us. Thanks for accommodating the change in schedule. It was obviously unplanned, but well deserved that Congresswoman Dingell had to go to the White House back in July. We're glad you all could make it today. My name is Jeff Brenneman. I'm the Vice President for Government Relations at Western Michigan University. So welcome to our first ever summer program for WeTalk, the university's Civil Discourse Initiative. I'm optimistic you will leave here today feeling energized, activated, and optimistic and hopeful about our future and in public discourse. Founded literally a month before the pandemic in February of 2020, WeTalk programming is focused on the importance of constructively engaging with people who hold differing views. Today's program embodies this vision, and I'm so grateful for our speakers and all of the community leaders that have joined us. Together, we can chart a constructive path for our own community. During the past 2 years, we have elevated this important conversation through different events and activities, including a speaker series where we've brought in authors and nationally known experts that have helped us identify actionable outcomes for this work. A Free Speech Cafe series that fosters conversation around free speech rights and responsibilities. Fall cafe topics, I think, are on the back of your program. I hope you will join us for some of our fall programs. We've also had an exercise called Moving Conversations, founded by one of our faculty members, a scripted conversation between two people to foster compassion and connection. Indulge me while we share a short video compiled earlier this year highlighting some of our work.
That doesn't make any sense.
You're listening to what I'm saying. We're not.
So what are you talking about?
Because what we're trying to build here is a set of community values and connections between us that will allow us to have conversations, not just this year during political season, but going forward on a whole range of issues.
It's also very important to listen to perspectives that I disagree with. You know, a couple of things happen. Either I learn much more why I believe what I believe, or I start to understand that other perspective a lot better, and now I can speak to both sides.
But to walk around and have this sense that you have the right for everything to fit you, then we're going to have chaos, because we each can't have that, because what I want is not what Jennifer wants or what Jessica wants. But if yet we say that's what the world has to be, it's going to be chaotic.
When we have the opportunity to engage and get to know one another beyond a surface level and really be able to develop a sense of shared experience, lots of good stuff comes from that.
That's what I call being pre-offended. I won't even wait for you to offend me. I'm just going to assume you're going to offend me. So for me, the question becomes, how do we change that? How do we, at the very least, create the incentive to just engage?
Well, these impactful programs couldn't be possible without the hard work of the WeTalk team, led by Margaret von Steinen in the back. Please join me in thanking Margaret, Emma Barata, and the students, faculty, and staff from WMU for their passion and dedication to make these events happen. We're also thankful for the many sponsors who support our work, including the Heterodox Academy, HXA as we call them, which awarded the WeTalk program their maximum grant award earlier this year. HXA calls on us to aspire to create college classrooms and campuses that welcome diverse people with diverse viewpoints. They provide resources to equip learners to engage with that diversity. The award helps support a campus visit and a future work that you're going to hear more about today at the conclusion of our panel discussion. It supported our free speech cafes and the development of the survey on your table we are using to make sure that we have impact in our work. We look forward to our future partnership with the Heterodox Academy and embracing the HXA way. We'd like to take this opportunity to encourage all WMU faculty and staff in attendance. Raise your hands. All right, thank you. To become an HXA member. It's easy and free to sign up on their website, heterodoxacademy.org. It'll give you access to their events, newsletters, as well as awards and funding opportunities. There's only one thing you have to agree to do. Support this statement. I support open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement in research and education. I'm thankful for the Heterodox Academy support and their mission for the work that we do in higher education. But I'm also incredibly grateful for the major partnership we have forged this year with the Fetzer Institute. Earlier this year, their programming helped us really get off the ground. The Fetzer Institute's mission is to help build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. Our paths crossed at Irshad Manji's WeTalk presentation last fall, which sparked conversations about how well our missions and interests align. By the beginning of 2022, we were making plans with Dr. Angela Graham, Fetzer Institute's Program Director for Southwest Michigan Strategies, to bring Dave Isay to campus last March. And with the generous funding, we have not only done that, but we're working on future work together. So we're excited to have Jonathan Lever from the Fetzer Institute here with us today to welcome and introduce our esteemed guests. Jonathan is the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President for the Fetzer Institute. He has an extensive career in philanthropy and the nonprofit sector for more than 15 years. He was a senior executive with the YMCA of the USA, where he led their national innovation efforts. Prior to the YUSA, he was CEO of the Nonprofit Center of Northeast Florida, a research associate at Indiana University's Center on Philanthropy, and the Hauser Center for Nonprofit Organizations at Harvard University. I was taken by a quote when he was named COO at Fetzer. In 2019, he said, "At a time in my life when our world feels increasingly polarized, fragile, and dark, I'm drawn to an organization whose founder, John Fetzer, believed, quote, love is the core energy that rules everything. Love is the one ingredient that holds us all together." So thank you, Jonathan, Angela, and the incredible team at the Fetzer Institute for their support. Jonathan, please introduce our esteemed guests.
Thank you, Jeff. I just want to say for the record, in case you didn't notice, I am wearing purple so that there's no sides taken here. Don't get to wear purple all that often. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you all for joining. Our community is honored to host 3 national leaders on this stage today for a conversation about collegiality in politics. 2 senior legislators serving us in Congress, Representative Debbie Dingell and Representative Fred Upton, and our moderator, Western Michigan University President, Dr. Edward Montgomery. Well, let me start with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. She's represented Michigan's 12th district in the U.S. House since 2015, where she made it a priority to be a voice for the Midwest on issues that matter most to working families. A member of the House Committees on Energy and Commerce and Natural Resources, Debbie is a leader on efforts to grow domestic manufacturing, improve access to quality, affordable health care, support seniors, veterans, Americans with disabilities. And I just noticed last week, Representative Dingell was elected co-chair of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus, and also her avid protection of the Great Lakes. Before being elected to Congress, Debbie worked in the auto industry for more than 3 decades, where she was a president of the General Motors Foundation and a senior executive for public affairs. She was also chairman of the Wayne State University Board of Governors and continues to fight to make higher education more affordable and accessible in Congress. Please join me on the stage when you're ready. Since 1987, Congressman Fred Upton has represented Southwest Michigan in the 6th Congressional District. A champion for bipartisan solutions, Fred is vice chair of the Bipartisan House Problem Solvers Caucus. For 6 years, Fred served as chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and today he serves as the top Republican on the Energy Committee. Fred fights for issues important to folks at home, like protecting our Great Lakes, ensuring safe drinking water, addressing the opioid epidemic, and getting game-changing health policy, like his 21st Century Cures Act enacted into law. Fred's priorities for today remain the same as when he was first elected in 1986. Job creation, economic growth, energy independence, and promoting world-class health innovation, and working to help all residents of Southwest Michigan live longer, better lives. Debbie and Fred are both members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, an independent, member-driven group in Congress with an equal number of Republican and Democratic representatives from across the country committed to, hallelujah, finding common ground on many of the key issues facing the nation. The caucus was formed in 2017 and agreed to find bipartisan solution on issues including healthcare, infrastructure, gun and school safety, immigration, coronavirus recovery, and contingency planning. A great friendship developed as Fred and Debbie tackled tough issues from opposite sides of the political aisles. In 2019, they launched a Civility tour in Michigan to talk about how they navigate respectful disagreement, collaborate, and compromise to pass legislation that benefits all citizens, not just those representing their parties. The pair have collaborated on pieces of legislation and provisions since they've joined forces on the caucus. And I know this is real because Representative Upton got a cell phone call from Representative Dingell, so they're like tight. Let me now introduce President Edward Montgomery as our moderator today, a nationally known labor economist who played major roles in both the Clinton and Obama administrations. During the Clinton administration, he held several positions, including the chief economist and deputy secretary of labor. During Obama administration, he was a member of the president's auto task force and led the interagency White House Council for Auto Communities and Workers. As a researcher, Dr. Montgomery has focused on state and local economic growth, wage and pension determination, savings behavior, productivity and economic dynamics, social insurance programs, and unions. Since becoming Western's 9th president in 2017, Dr. Montgomery has launched many initiatives focused on helping students to succeed. In June 2021, he made the groundbreaking announcement that Western had received a $550 million donation, the largest ever for a public university in the United States, called the Empowering Futures Gift. In addition to providing an array of scholarship support, thanks to this gift, launching this fall is a network of services advancing the university's approach to the whole person education. With that, Dr. Montgomery.
Thank you, Jonathan, for those gracious introductions, and welcome everybody to this great occasion. So let me jump right in. I think I met both of you for the first time during the auto crisis. And the national economy was in turmoil, the state economy was in turmoil. And the striking thing is, despite the turmoil, both Republicans and Democrats during that time came together to try and forge a solution to help save the state and help the economy. Do you think something like that is doable again as we now face potentially another economic turn in the economy and continuing ongoing challenges where Republicans and Democrats would come together around some major action?
I'd like to think that that would occur, and that's indeed exactly where we met. I can remember getting a call from Debbie's husband, John. He was then the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It was in August of 2008. And he didn't know I was in Chicago, so there was a time change, and he called at 6 in the morning. Fred, we got a problem. Have you talked to, the chairman of GM? And I don't know that he was using his phone. I think he might have just opened the window and just bellowed this thing out. And I said, no, I hadn't talked to the chairman yet. And he goes, well, you will. And but the bottom, and it was like literally today. It was like today. It was like the first day of the August break. And it was on a Saturday morning, and we put our heads together, and we saved the industry. And we proved the point that had we not done so, there was nobody to pick up the pieces. There was not a bank, there was not another country. It would have, and so even Ford, and you know this well, Ford, who wasn't a direct recipient of any money, and remember GM paid it back with interest, even Ford supported it because it was the same suppliers.
Right.
The glass, the hub, you couldn't do it. And I worked very hard with then our Republican candidate, John McCain, and John and Carl Levin and Debbie Stabenow as well. They worked very hard with Obama, Senator Obama, And we made it clear that it was not a political deal, that whoever won, because the vote transpired the next couple of months. It wasn't really done until about October, November. Right. But I worked with then, John Boehner, the speaker. I mean, we made it, Dave Camp and others. Our Michigan delegation stood together. So your question, could it happen today? It almost was the same case with this chip bill that President Biden is likely to sign in the next day or two if he didn't sign it today. We passed it in the House last Thursday. It was, man, and Debbie and I did some national radio earlier this morning, and I'll let her tell the story, but had we not got this done, when we've gone from chip manufacturing in this country from about 45% of the world output to about 12%. If we didn't get this thing done, and it's been languishing, the Senate first passed it last summer, if we didn't get it done now, and there was a lot of pressure not to, we would have lost even more. And these products, whether it be autos, appliances, cell phones, they would have been made someplace else. I mean, so we came together, but it was a lot closer than people thought. I don't remember the vote that we had on the auto rescue, but I want to say it might have been 100, maybe more votes different. In the House, we had only 25 Republicans. 25 of us voted for it last week. And our leadership worked hard against it. They said, wait till next year. We can't wait on something like this. But I'll let Debbie tell the story that she told this morning on POTUS.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and it's great to be here, and it's great to see Ed. And I apologize that my mother's having a procedure. She's been in the hospital for 3 days, and the doctor started texting me with questions just as I came up here. And, Fred and I are close friends. We also have older parents, and we talk about our parents every day, because no matter what job you have, your family, always make your family the most important thing. So I apologize, but that's the only reason my phone would be on my lap. I don't know, Ed. I go back to those days. I watched John. I think the industry made a lot of mistakes. I probably am one of the more critical people of the industry. But John, I remember the late night phone calls. He talked to the Treasury. It was Republican. I mean, it was George Bush's administration. He talked to the president a lot. I think he talked to the then Treasury Secretary almost every night. And it wasn't a partisan issue. It was, the American auto industry is still the backbone of the American economy. 1 out of 8 jobs is related to it. And then when you start to go into what happens to communities, and they all knew that and it was not popular. It was really not popular. Well, it wasn't popular in either party, but but you had a president of the United States and a Secretary of Treasury who understood what would happen to the economy if this did not happen. That's just what it was, pure and simple. And at that time, Fred and John look, Fred's been my friend and John's friend forever, and we do call each other at all hours. When my mother was rushed to the hospital, he was the first person I called to say, I'm leaving, I gotta get home. So we talk about everything. But in those, we really needed to save the industry. And then the Michigan delegation was united. This CHIPS bill, I was in Dearborn this morning, and you drive down the streets and the parking lots are full of cars that have been produced but can't be sold because they don't have the chips. And I'm not going to give you the name of the CEO, but one of the OEM CEOs told me, look, this is where we're at. And I was about to give a gender. Said,
you can say her name, Debbie. We figured it out.
But said to me, I've been dealing with this for 18 months. And we can't do it any longer. We cannot operate this way. So if you don't get this fixed, Germany's already built a chips plant while we've been, I'll use a John Dingell word, probably not politically, but fiddle bitching around. She said, we're going to tell our suppliers that they've got to guarantee this and we're going to build in another country. We did have, I worked this bill really hard, and as did Fred. We are problem solvers. Fred and I got problem solvers out in front of this a long time ago. His leadership was breaking arms and telling people not to vote for it. But another year, we were losing jobs. And But we don't have supply chain resiliency. You know, we thought it was great to outsource just-in-time management and outsourcing all these jobs. Well, COVID shined a light on what's happened to this country. When you could not get our frontline workers face masks, it's the other reason I'm wearing my face mask, by the way, because my mother is in the hospital. But you couldn't get them gloves, you couldn't get we said, and you know, Fred and I were both working together then. I mean, we must have talked 10 times a day, maybe 15 or 20 during that, because, you know, the hospitals were having crisis, we were having to, but we were talking to people in China, sending people in China to check the quality of equipment that they might send, but some of it was substandard, and Michigan companies were paying millions of dollars, and we needed to have someone check the quality. You know, this is American issues, and we have got to work on it together, and that's what we try to do, and I would hope, you know, COVID at the beginning was a little bipartisan. It got less bipartisan as time, well, okay, pretty soon. But, you know, there are just, I just believe we're Americans first and Democrats and Republicans second.
So Ed is part of the Problem Solvers Caucus. So we meet every week, either by Zoom. We had Zelensky on the Zoom with just us a couple months ago. But we had the CEO of Intel actually with us. And you know, they promise and that they're going to deliver. I mean, for Ohio, they are going to build a $100 billion facility in Ohio. And it was going to go someplace else, overseas, if we didn't get this vote done. So New York, Arizona, and Ohio are the huge winners. But we're winners too, because we can't sell these cars without the chips. And these are going to be six-figure jobs. I mean, the average salary they're told us is like $130,000. So that's why we need more engineers coming out of here. And you're doing a good job. But I mean, there is a market for that. And we got to make sure that we don't get beat by, you know, China's doing this. Taiwan's one of the reasons why maybe Speaker Pelosi is going to go there in the next couple of days. But Germany, all these different nations are trying to up their market share. And if we just sat on our hands and did nothing, all of a sudden we'll be in single digits and those jobs will never come back. Never.
Well, often during campaign season, there's return to vilifying your opponent, and then it makes it hard afterwards to work together.
Andy Davis is here. Andy and I ran against each other a lot of years ago, and we never vilified each other. In fact, because of COVID, I couldn't grab him by the collar today, but I gave him an elbow bump anyway. But he's been, you know, that happens in some campaigns, but tried not to do it in mine.
Well, Fred and I have a rule. It's actually, you call it the...
Oh, yeah. Well, tell them about the problem solvers rule.
Well, it's a but before it was a problem solvers rule, it was a John Dingell rule.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
John Dingell never campaigned against any colleague from Michigan that was an incumbent, because if you're going to work with somebody, you got to have their trust and respect, and you simply wouldn't do it. Fred and I may be the only two in the delegation that still, that's been my rule from the time that I went in. And then problem solvers, which started 4 years ago, is that you may not campaign against another member of the problem solvers or give them money. But obviously, our Michigan delegation is much broader than the people that are members of the problem solvers. And, you know, I can't campaign against, it's getting harder. I'm not going to kid you that the vitriolicness is getting worse, and you just can't believe some votes, but we have to, Great Lakes is still one of the subjects we still, maybe the only subject. You got to try to bring people together and find that common ground. And if you've attacked somebody viscerally, if you've attacked their integrity, you've done name calling or bullying, it's very hard to trust that person.
And we see each other. I mean, we're on the planes, you know, there's, you know, catch up in Detroit or someplace else and, you know, catch that Delta flight back to D.C. We see each other in the hallway. We're different members on different committees. I mean, our delegation is supposed to work. And that means we got people on Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce and Appropriations. And, you know, particularly looking out for the Great Lakes or industries. I mean, we should be there as a team. And whether our governor is Republican or Democrat, often he or she brings us in together and talks about issues. And if all of a sudden you're busting someone's chops, and it doesn't go very well over very well with what's going on.
So I'm sure there are issues where you just don't agree. And how do you keep those issues
I make her laugh.
Many issues or whatever, where you don't agree. How do you keep those issues or those disagreements from precluding the possibility of other areas where maybe you start off apart, but there is some common ground you can find? How do you respectfully disagree?
I think you just have to be honest from the get-go. I mean, if you're not going to agree on something, then you let it be known, and you can have friendly, courteous debate for sure, and you just move on to something else. And but it's the game playing that I think makes people mad. So
yeah, I mean, I can't ever think of when we've ever been tense about not agreeing with. So I think we know each other so well that we know where we are on issues, and if, and I during COVID, you'd learn about a problem, and I'd call Fred, we got this problem here, we got this problem here, or we'd talk about it. He'd go, you're never going to get Republicans to do this, and I'd go, you're never going to get Dems to do this. And I think that Fred and I are solution driven. We know who we are. We know where we're coming from. We both have had moments with our leadership. And what we try to do is, I know the issues that he and I aren't going to agree on. But we really, don't you think we're solution driven? Maybe that's,
Yeah, but it's called honesty. It's just
it's very.
No surprises. And, I'm going to give you an answer about, what's going on. And, and I'm blessed to have pretty good I was the deputy whip for a lot of years, a few years ago, and but as former chairman of Energy and Commerce Committee, I've got a really good relationship not only with my leadership but also with the Democrats as well. Nancy Pelosi's in my class, so she was elected the same year I was. So it's hard. I call her Nancy because that's what I called her before she was Speaker, and she does call me Fred. Unlike the President, I do call Mr. President. He calls me Fred too.
But I'll give you an example. So Fred and I don't know if you're going to thank me for this, but like last week on assault weapons, I didn't know really where he would be. And we had there were a lot of Democrats that wanted him to go. And we had a very intellectual discussion about why he couldn't vote for it. He thought the definition of what an assault weapon was too loose and that it wasn't the right bill. And I went, okay, I respect that, and went back to leadership and said, leave him alone. You're not going to get him. But it was an honest, intellectual discussion. And I will keep leadership from, never mind, I'm going to behave.
Nah. So to have an honest conversation, you often have to agree on facts as opposed to alternative facts. Is there a push or is there an openness to actually look at data, the reality, or is that colored now with?
No, you need to do that. So I look back when I chaired Energy and Commerce, and we did. First of all, I changed the rules of our committee so that bipartisan, and that's been the case now. The rules have stayed the same for my two successors. Bipartisan amendments come ahead of the queue. So it doesn't matter what title they're in, but if you work, and you got 50 members in essence on the committee, and the chair sits in the middle, and majority's on one side, the minority's on the other, and call for bipartisan amendments first, and my goodness, if you got a Democrat and a Republican over here and they're together, guess what? That amendment's going to pass. And it's going to probably strengthen the bill in terms of getting things done. And our big issue, of course, legacy issue was 21st century cures, and this was a bill that, frankly, as now you look back, you look at our area here, Kalamazoo and Portage, we wouldn't have had the vaccine approved for COVID until 8 or 10 months later, had we not expedited the approval of drugs and devices. So whether it's that, whether it's sickle cell, whether it's cystic fibrosis, you look at some of the breakthroughs that we're going to see maybe coming up soon in Alzheimer's and other things. It's all centered on what we were able to do in our committee, 53-0. And then it was literally the last bill that President Obama signed into law. You look now at what Pfizer's doing here, Paxlovid. It's going to be made here. You know, my chief of staff took that this morning. She has a bad case of COVID. We know that that's saving lives. And again, it's months ahead of otherwise what would have occurred. And it was because of the bipartisan effort of the Congress. Now, we use facts. We learned that, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly among the folks that help finance this, the venture capitalists, they were sending their money overseas, not only for drugs, but also devices. Think Stryker. All of a sudden that changed. And we're able to do these here. And as you have seen yourself, I mean, we walk through the Stryker facilities here. Oh, they're incredible in terms of what they're working on, what they're doing, the lives that they're going to save. I mean, it's just incredible. And we had some of those meetings here. Debbie came over here. I went over to her side of the state with what University of Michigan has done and the researchers. And, we were able to fashion this package together that at the end of the day saves hundreds of thousands of Americans, let alone probably millions overseas. And we use facts. That's what we did. Did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree with them. It's Republicans we need to worry about not using facts. But
you're mumbling, Debbie.
I know. But I am going to tell you, social media, which was supposed to be the greatest thing since sliced bread because it was going to bring us all together, has become such a source of harm. I think it pits people against each other. I think there's so many false facts. Social media is the biggest, but we do see it in different forms of media and talking to each other. And people don't even know where to go to get the facts. What's a credible source of what the facts are? So I think it's a real problem. But we got to just keep working it. I'll give you. Here's an example, just today's example. I posted today on my Facebook site some stuff, and I am upset about the Senate. I know Fred is too. Who passed, there's a bill. A lot of veterans have been exposed to toxic burn pits and have gotten cancer. It's a very documented health, and both of us I've had veterans just cry in my arms, and they're desperate for help. And the Senate passed a bill with 84 votes a few weeks ago, and then last week, because they were mad that Manchin's working out in reconciliation, then 25 senators who voted yes voted no. So I said, look, vote against reconciliation. I'd like you to vote for it, but vote against that. But don't make the veterans your political, the political scapegoat here. And someone posted today that this was the exact same, it wasn't the exact same bill that Schumer had added. And I went back to my staff and I said, okay, I want the facts. It is the same bill. I went back and verified it. But people don't believe it. They're out there saying that this has been done and that's been done. And we shouldn't be playing political games with something that's as important to a veteran who has served this country honorably. And 84 senators did vote for it. So but again, there are a lot of people out there, I can tell you this, that believe that Schumer changed that bill. Now, they did screw up, and it was, I don't know who did it, but it was a technicality in the way that it got sent over on a parliamentary procedure, but they didn't change the bill substantively. It's the same bill. But now we've got people all over the country. And why are we playing political games and holding veterans hostage it's not right. It's just simply not right.
So this is the same as what Agent Orange was for Vietnam, that we finally took care of just in the last 2 years ago. I had a draft card number, but the number was too high, but Vietnam was over. And I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan with our troops there. I saw some of the burn pits when I was in the green zone in Iraq. I remember specifically landing, and they had one there, and it's the same health benefits or the same health issue that it was with Agent Orange. And it took a little while, but we finally got it done, and we passed it out of the House with a decent vote. I think there's still 60 or 80 folks that voted against it. But it's like, if you can't help your veterans, and just since the Senate failed to pass it, they know of at least 2, which was last week, they know of 2 suicides of vets who saw that it wasn't going to come, and they didn't know how they could live without that benefit, and they committed suicide since Friday.
And they don't want their families to have to, the desperation of these veterans who are trying to get this help.
There's a hunger strike right now outside the Capitol until it gets done.
Yeah, it's just wrong.
So what role does the media play? There was a day, show you my age, Walter Cronkite would get on, we'd tune on, and if Walter said something, you tended to believe him. Does the media help point the way, shine the light, if not necessarily answer all the questions? Or is the media, and this may be too broad a question, so are they part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, I'm a journalism major. They don't have that anymore at Michigan. It's communications, all right? I have to say that I blame the media for a lot of what we have today, just because I don't see that they are nearly as accountable on what's going on as they once were. So way before you were here, Ed, we had a wonderful reporter here in town. My name is Charlotte Channing, Tony Griffin. Really marvelous people. They would not let a sleeping, you couldn't hide something. They exposed it. They covered this city and the county and the state like a blanket. Now you have your 24/7 news, and if you want to watch, and people go migrate to the, what perspective they might want to have. But your local news, I'll just use the Gazette. It doesn't show up. Like my paper in St. Joe or the Herald Palladium, it's not the same. You have the social media stuff, but again, you don't know necessarily who to trust. And like Debbie just pointed out, you got bad information that gets out there, and then it goes viral. But it's not the same oversight, it seems to me. And I see other legislators that are here. I'd be anxious to see what their opinions are, but I see some nods of the heads, and I just don't. And maybe life's too complex. We got grandkids, we got all these different things going on, but it's not like the old days of Walter Cronkite, who I got to know, by the way, before he passed away. He was an incredible dinner guest one night, but man, it just doesn't seem like you have the accountability like you once had in terms of what people understand. Maybe we've got just too many issues in a complex world.
Well, the media's changed. At the times that you're talking about, there were a few news outlets. There were 3 networks. And nobody, by the way, thought of any of the networks having a political bias, the way you think of Fox being conservative, CNN, I would actually say CNN and MSNBC are to the left. Nobody, and then as Fred was talking about, I still think that the New York Times, Republicans wouldn't say that, but Washington Post, there are a few large publications that are investing in the news. But we've stopped investing in smaller local newspapers. They don't have the resources or the money to cover those local issues, to hold people accountable on what is happening. There's been, we've got a ton of radio stations, we've got a ton of social media, we've got, people start a publication I've been watching one of the congressional races in this state, and there are media with a bent that are covering each of the candidates and playing stories just to those candidates' advantage. That's not media. That's not accountability. That's not objectivity. And so I think the media still has a role to play. I think it has a very important role to play to hold people accountable. But, one of the things that's happening in this country that I think is a danger to all of us, is a very huge danger, is that there are people that are deliberately trying to undermine the credibility and the people's confidence in institutions. It's what's happening in the media. They're trying to undermine everybody's confidence in election outcomes, which is a real danger this year, but in the presidential campaign in 24, a super danger. But there are people that are deliberately trying to make it so people don't trust the media, that are pitting people against each other. And when you do not have confidence, when your institutions do not have credibility, your democracy is in real danger.
So let me go somewhere where you may both not agree. So the recent Supreme Court decision on Dobbs returned abortion to the states. What role do you see for federal officials in the question of abortion or choice going forward?
I'm finally going to let Debbie go first.
I'm not only focused on that decision, I'm focused on a week of, this country was founded on a separation of church and state. The first decision that they made was challenging the separation of church and state, to be perfectly frank. I've always found the discussion of Roe to be, I hope it's never easy for anybody. But I am going to say that the separation of church and state is something that is a fundamental principle of our democracy, that it is an individual's right to choose. It is a decision between a woman, her faith, her doctor, and family, friend, any person she wishes to bring into it. I do not believe that 6 people should have the right to turn 50 years of precedent upside down. And I think we do need to, it's created chaos across the country. I have fought, when I interviewed for my job at General Motors, which is where I worked before I came to Congress, I got asked, why would a woman want to work at General Motors? When you're talking to right now about some of these things, there's you're struck when you're at things. They're young women who are probably students at Western and elsewhere and like, who is going to tell me what I can do with my personal women's health decisions? And then there are women, I'm not old, but I'm seasoned, who have really fought. We have really fought to make progress, who cannot believe that we are going backwards. So I do believe we have passed in the House, I don't think Fred voted for it, the Women's House, I forget what we called it, because I do not want it ever to be easy for any woman, but we are talking about women's health care. And you've seen the chaos that's been caused even in women who, if they have a miscarriage, aren't sure if a hospital can give them a D&C. They're now talking about telling a woman what her contraception should. This is women's health care. The government doesn't belong in the business of telling a woman what her health care is.
So Ed, certainly if you look at the two of us, Debbie would call herself pro-choice, I would call myself pro-life. Until this decision, I'd say we probably had a little bit of a truce in that, even though the Congress might be pro-choice. Speaker Pelosi, Nancy, she's very pro-choice and it's had a larger majority than even today in the past, and the same thing in the Senate. The battle has been federal funds for abortion, and there's been an agreement in essence. Maybe not an agreement, but it's happened that no federal funds. That's been the really big issue on the federal side. What the court did was, and I think again, and I'm not a lawyer, but if you look at what happened, it was not unexpected. Maybe because of the early release of the draft, but I think the country was. They saw what was going to happen even before the release of the draft. And it really does put it back in the state's lap. And we'll have a ballot initiative here in Michigan come fall. But to look at Washington to try and solve this through the Congress, no. Because you remember in the Senate, you need 60 votes to get something done. And it's exactly 50-50. So you're never going to get, at least for a lot of years, I don't think, a lot of elections, 60 votes to go one way or the other. And if you don't go the same way as the president, you're going to get a veto, so then you need 2/3 of the vote. And even teen something up like did happen in the House, and it passed the bill that Debbie referenced. It's not going anywhere, and the Senate won't even be considered because they can't have the votes to proceed. So it really does throw it back in the lap of the states, the governors in the state house and the state senators in every state in terms of what's going to happen. And what has been sort of somewhat of a truce on the side in the federal funds and issues like that, that's now going away because of the court decision.
That's Fred is right, but I call that a pragmatic answer.
Yeah, that's
me. That is Fred pragmatic. And by the way, there are some Republicans that have said that they would support the bill. Whether they got to 60 is pragmatic. But
be a stretch.
It's a stretch. It is a stretch. But that doesn't mean that the federal government. There's one of the interesting discussions these days is what is the role of federal government? What is the role of state government? We find it when we talk about autonomous vehicles or, state. I think because it is going to cause mass chaos, having a federal vote would be the right thing. Fred's answer is totally correct about what's doable right now.
So there was a day when we did big controversial things. The Clean Air Act was a controversial bill, passed in a bipartisan way, brought together Republicans and Democrats. Were the incentives different? What should be the incentives now to get congressmen and women and senators to think about big pieces of legislation that are on these controversial areas that maybe is leadership as opposed to following the tag?
Well, climate change is real. We see it today. I stopped at a neighbor's house on the way here to drop something off, and they just came back from Paris last night, and they've had tremendous heat over there. And you look at these fires out west, and they're actually changing climate. I think it's the fire right now in California is the largest fire they've ever had. They're not making a lot of headway in putting it out, and that's where we, as the U.S., can really lead. We're going to be closing all of our coal plants here in Michigan in the next couple of years. I think that's a good thing.
Despite what the courts did?
I counted a coal train last night going through St. Joe up to the plant up in Grand Haven. 118 cars on that train. It rolls through St. Joe almost every other day going up there. But nuclear is something that we've actually seen diminish. We've had 2 nuclear plants in our district. One just closed a couple months ago. There's no emissions. We haven't seen a new nuclear plant come online for a lot of years, and we've got some technology to think that they can do some smaller units, but still not a lot of progress in those approvals. But we just built a new gas plant in Niles, Michigan. $1 billion on this facility. If you know Niles, it's 8 traffic lights or so down on the border with South Bend, but it's 50% cleaner than coal. Those are technology steps that we ought to take advantage of. I was with the president earlier this year, I think it was, maybe it was last year. Debbie was with me, I was last year, when he signed the methane bill, which I supported. We know that we can reduce methane emissions, and as you pump for oil and gas, the big companies, the Exxons, but even the Shells and other, they know that they're willing to use that technology and reduce methane, and with that technology, we ought to do that. But it was a fight. I think I was one of 8 Republicans that voted for it. Peter Meyer and myself, the only ones here locally that did that. But we got to use that technology to lower these emissions, and we can do that, and we can be the leaders on this. And we've seen with renewables the same thing with wind and solar in terms of what's going on in promotions. It's going to take a little while. You look at the electric cars again, going back to what brought us together a lot of years ago. We're slowly making some advances, but it's awfully slow. It's still less than 4% of sales yet. The big guys, the GMs and the Fords, they want to be 100% electric in the next 10 or 15 years. I think that's going to be pretty hard. But we have to have the grid. We have to have all that technology, which is another reason why that infrastructure bill, again, something that the Problem Solvers Caucus worked on, we had $50 billion in there to improve the energy infrastructure, in addition to roads and bridges and ports and things like that, because we know that if we go there, we got to have the grid that actually can send that electricity to our homes and factories, and we can't do it today, which is why that mark is still 2% in terms of electric vehicle sales.
Most people don't know that it was Richard Nixon that signed the EPA. It was interesting. There wasn't obviously an age difference between my husband and I. So I was going through some library clippings of his. He authored the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, NEPA. And you can't believe this in this day and age, coming from Michigan, how widely denounced he was by everybody for the Clean Water Act. I mean, you can't imagine that now. And Richard Nixon said he was right. So, and water.
Never argue with John Dingell.
And I think that clean water was probably the issue of the 60s, the way that, our waters were so polluted. I am seasoned enough to remember what our Great Lakes were like and what the water was like, what had happened to it. Electric vehicles are something that I'm really proud of this. I did not sign on to the Green New Deal. When that came out, I don't want to be quoted as saying I was really proud of not signing on to the Green New Deal, but I did not do it because labor was not.
I didn't either.
Yeah, no. But all the labor wasn't at the table, and workers are really worried about their future. So I said, I made this pledge to the environmental community. We're going to bring a table together. And the president of every major environmental group, the Gene Karpinski from LCV, Fred Kropp from EDF, and our DC Sierra Club, 15 of them, were all at the table, and then the unions were all there, the UAW, the mining, the IBAW. And there were really tough discussions, really hard, nitty-gritty discussions. The OEMs weren't part of it. They kind of waited to see what was going to give birth. But we all stood at the White House last August, and the autos were part of it, where the president announced a target of 50% sales of electric vehicles by the year 2030. And everybody came together. They knew, nobody doesn't know that global climate is real. Now, now there are people, Donald Trump doesn't like EVs. Joe Manchin probably doesn't either, but he's kept working at it. We got a breakthrough last week on reconciliation and getting some important things that need to be done for global climate. And this is an example of where you can have anxiety, you can be worried about things, you can have differences of opinion, but you come together and find the common ground. And I think that's really important. And I think it's what we have to do. The next table I'm putting together is a mining table, because quite frankly, there are 3 buckets we've got to do to get to EVs. One is the vehicles have to be affordable. And right now they're not for a lot of people. As we scale up to mass production, we'll get there. 2, we got to develop a battery that is going to have range, and we're not going to be 80% dependent upon China. And Joe Manchin's a wonderful dear friend. He and John were close, and he's been good and protective of me. But he's like, Debbie, I'm not doing anything that increases our dependence upon China. And the environmentalists will never let a permit go through. Well, they know that that's an issue, so there's going to be some review of the permitting process is coming out of this whole deal that was announced last week. We got a table that, just like what we did on EVs, that's going to come together. And then third, Fred's talked about, is we got to build out the infrastructure for charging units, and we got to upgrade the power grid. But we got to do it together. We got to figure out how we're going to get it done, how we're going to pay for it, and there's some people that are still fighting EVs. The OEMs aren't. They're building these vehicles. They know that it's where it is for the future. And I did a town hall with the governor, with some UAW workers about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and on EVs. And I thought for sure we might still get some anxiety about what's going to happen as they go from the internal combustion engine, which requires more jobs, but there'll be new jobs. There wasn't a single word about it. It was, how are we going to service those? That they're really complicated. You could, I mean, it was a very, and that's how we got to look at that subject. You pull people together, yet find the common ground, you air your anxieties, listen to each other, and, you know, try to solve a problem. Global climate's real.
So we could continue, but I also wanted to let a chance for you all to be part of the conversation. So I'm going to open it up to audience questions, but I thought I'd start with Jonathan. Did you want to ask the first question?
Thank you. Yes. So as you may know, at the Fetzer Institute, we talk a lot about love. And in fact, we think love is the key to ennobling our politics as well as many other things. And that sounds maybe a little pie in the sky, but I think it's actually one of the most strategic things that we could do. So in that spirit, I wonder how our politics might be different if we resisted the temptation to go left or right, but went deep, really calling on our deepest faith and our deepest spirituality. So my question to you is, how, if at all, does your faith, spirituality, your sense of sacred, influence how you act as a legislator and how you legislate?
So relationships are really important. Getting to know people. You know, I knew about Debbie's mom Friday.
When it happened.
Yeah. And I called her Saturday, get an update. Our Problem Solvers Caucus, 60 members. You can bring one staff person, and not a thing has ever leaked. 50 meetings. No, and you trust each other. You know, you're sitting next to Republicans and Democrats. They know that you're not going to be fighting them. You know, you're not going to be tagging them. We have a civility pledge as well, but we get to know their families, their spouses. We see what they post as well, so you really do get to know some of that character that's there, and it's different. And I would guess, and Debbie may have a better thing about this than maybe not, but in the old days you didn't have, campaigns are so expensive, and you got to raise all that money, and it used to be you didn't have to do that, and there was. People say there's a lot more congeniality because Dan Rostenkowski would drive to Washington and back, and he'd take Bob Michael, who was then the Republican leader, with him, and they would, it's a long drive. I know, I've done it 300 times. I mean, literally, I've done it 300 times. But you do that, and but now it's harder because you're there 3 nights a week, because generally you have a 4-day weekend. You'll finish up Thursday night and you'll come back Tuesday or, Monday to Friday, And so this is a place, the sort of the niche that you get of your college where you really get to know them. So problem solvers. So last week, a bunch of us went out to dinner. We had votes late, and so we went out to dinner, and there's Ted Cruz at the next table. So, oh my God. I said, I know he knows who I am. I know. But that's not my little crowd that I associate with. But it really is the relationships that get things done. Whether it's as a delegation, we have to rely on each other. We have, we have just one member on Ways and Means Committee, Dan Kildee. Don't have a Republican. Dave Camp used to chair it. Guy Vanderjack used to be on a lot of years ago. So you really have to rely on those relationships in who you trust and get the facts. I'm not an expert on defense, but I'm gonna go to Mike Rogers, whose office used to be next to mine, and I sit next to him, and I'll ask him about some of the issues. Or on agriculture, I do know a little bit about ag, but I'm not on the committee. But I know G.T. Thompson, and so we had an issue on Cuba the other day, and the issue was, is money going to go to the Cuban government, or is it going to go to the farmers? And, he said, oh, that's a really good question. I got to find out. And he came back when, the two of us then voted the same. So, you know, as your faith, yeah, there's a lot of, so Arthur Brooks, I would, you know, he's written a lot of really good, I know him personally, and he comes up, I had him come speak to our committee members a couple times when I was chair. But your faith, you know, there's a number of faith groups that meet. There's a prayer breakfast in both the House and the Senate. There's some Bible studies, but, you know, you want to live your faith. And I think that's what the people that I associate with do.
I agree with Fred. I mean, I'm a Catholic woman. The nuns instilled in me the values that I bring to my job every single day. But that's why I think relationships matter. People used to, nowadays, when I first married John, you know, people didn't go home every weekend. We didn't have airplanes the way we did. People had potluck. Fred and I are still part of a group, sort of. Pandemic kind of people stopped getting together, but we were a bipartisan group. We did potluck dinners on weekends, and you get to know each other. If you know somebody, you trust somebody. When your kids go to school, your kids are sharing experiences, it's far easier to trust someone. But the values that the nuns instilled in me are what I bring to my job every single day. I do go to the prayer breakfast sometimes. But I do believe, you know, the world has gotten very complicated. So faith, we need to remind people that all faiths have common values. You know, I've represented the largest population of Arab Americans in the country, and I've seen the hate, and I've, you know, worked a lot of issues. It's a complicated issue, but the values that were instilled in me are what I bring to my job every single day, and I try to, in that respect that I was taught, that you give every person, that civility is what the nuns taught me, and I'm proud of that every day.
And just to use a topic of today, Ukraine, you know, I've been there, I'm on the Ukraine caucus, but I've been there a couple of times way before this thing started. And that's, to a large degree, pulled us together too, as we talked to Republicans and Democrats who go there, sort of like went to Iraq and Afghanistan. You see these atrocities and go, how can someone do this? How can, in terms of that attack? And, you know, in the classified briefings that we have, we learn a lot what's going on, but he just, you know, here this is what your folks fought in World War II, and here we see it in the 21st century.
Okay, I would invite anybody from, can we give him a microphone?
Thank you. My name is John Clark, and I teach in the political science department here at Western, and I have the opportunity to teach courses on Congress with some frequency. One of the things that we sometimes talk about, and this sort of goes to the question that President Montgomery asked with regard to incentives, is that in many ways, at least from my perspective, the incentives that most members of Congress seem to be responding to are different than they once were. It used to be that there were more than 60 members of the House of Representatives who were interested in solving problems. And it seems now like for many members, they're responding to incentives that essentially say the biggest problem is that there are too many people from the other party here. And so it's less about fixing public policy or using public policy to address problems, and more about the next election and how one side can one-up the other side in the next election. Now, those incentives don't start in Congress, right? We provide those incentives to our members of Congress, oftentimes. What kinds of things, in your views, could we as citizens do differently that would reinforce the incentive of solving problems rather than the incentive of not worrying about the problems because the next election is more important than solving the problems? Are there things that we should be focused on? Are there things that I should be doing in my classroom to sort of get that message across?
Thank you. So that's a very good question. I mean, part of the issue is these districts are so big. 750,000 people is what Debbie
And it's
I
more
represent.
that next term.
We lose a seat here in Michigan because we stayed stable in population while other states grew. And, you know, we're going to have this primary election tomorrow in Michigan. I don't think 15% of the people will vote, of the eligible voters will vote, which means that 8% get to decide who the candidates are going to be for literally, you know, the whole slate of things. And that's very discouraging. I mean, when I was one that supported the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. The Supreme Court threw some of it out because it was alleged, you know, they ruled unconstitutional. But somehow we have to do some things to, you know, it goes back to what Debbie said a little bit earlier too. We want to make sure that people have confidence in the elections, because if they don't, they're not going to go vote, which is now an issue that we didn't have as large a degree as we once did. But campaigns are expensive. You know, it's millions of dollars in every race, and that's, you know, again, elections are different states, but that's a lot of $1,000 contributions that you have to raise to get up to $6 or $8 million, and then you've got the outside interests that often pump in. You know, all of a sudden, you know, you take Peter Meyer's race up here in Grand Rapids. There was, I think $425,000 that was just dumped in the last 5 days of the election. I mean, who knew this was coming? I can remember one of those elections. I thought we were doing just fine. All of a sudden, I got a call, and I'm in Mattawan. I was like, oh, you wouldn't believe this guy is like, oh my goodness. And so it's like, you know, I was a Boy Scout, not an Eagle Scout, but be prepared. I mean, so that's, you know, for me, you put your family first, your job second, and if you do those two right, usually the third comes okay. But for a lot of folks, it's different. I mean, people have to discern and look at the priorities that they have. And we have a close alignment. You know, I think Pelosi's margin is, 5 votes, and next Tuesday it's going to be 4 because we're likely to win a special election in Minnesota. A fellow, good friend of mine who died, he thought he'd be saved because of 21st Century Cures, and he got a relapse of cancer, and he died, so he'll be replaced next week. So that margin will be 4 or 3 instead of 4 votes. So it's like all hands on deck on some of that. With our problem solvers, there are probably more that would like to, in fact, I know that there are more that would like to be in it, but they don't like our rules. They don't like our rules that you can't go out and campaign against somebody from your own delegation or whatever, or that we're going to take a vote and we're going to try to be together on an issue like chips that we pass. They'd like to just vote no. And so we're actually, you know, as we had a little planning meeting this last week, our group might actually shrink a little bit next year, just so that we're more focused and together and have even maybe a bigger baseball bat in terms of being able to swat a hit or two across the plate.
You know, I would say it's not just money or party, but it's everybody's afraid of Donald Trump. I'm going to build on what, not everybody in our party, but in your party, but people were progressives, and there have been a lot of fights between the progressives and the more mainstream members. I mean, Fred's absolutely right that too many people simply aren't voting. So you are letting the far right and the far left really dominate over what happened. And then candidates become very concerned that they're not going to get the endorsement of people that they want, and that they could then lose their election. And I think that it's an old word, but the silent majority need to not be silent and need to demand accountability from their elected officials. That I do know when I'm out. It's harder to get around, by the way. With my new district, I used to go up and down 94, and now I got to do a 275, and I try to do a dozen events. It is not unusual for me to do a dozen events. I leave my house at 6:30 on Saturdays, and I'm very lucky to get home by 10 p.m. But I want to know what people are saying, and I listen to them, and I want to.
We have better farmers markets over here than you have over there. I just want you to know.
He does know I go to all my farmers markets, but you know, people are angry. They're and people are fed up with all the partisan bickering. But I say to people, did you vote? Did you return your absentee ballot? They're not doing it. So you know, we're letting both parties are letting some people dominate it that should not dominate. And how do you? The way you're going to incentivize is demand accountability of the voters, because I would actually argue, well, money helps you get elected. People are you know, I'll tell you, I'm at a point right now, I'd say what I think, I do what I'm going to do, and Fred and I, neither of us, I wanted him to run again, by the way, and I think he should be running. I'm going to do what's right, period. And I do say what I think is right, and I've had Nancy Pelosi mad at me for 5 months, and Fred's had to keep me from being something more than once. But I'm going to do what I think's right. But too many people, you know, feel that pressure, and hey, look, it is not pleasant being on the shit list, and we've both been on the shit list. It's not everybody wants to put up with it.
Other questions? Becky?
Fred. It's the first time I called him Fred rather than Congress.
Finally. It's taken him 20 years,
well,
30.
You finally retired.
Yeah. I need my cane.
Difficult things for the Congress to do. You just mentioned that, you know, representation is for much larger areas. Have you ever considered just enlarging the Congress so that the size of representation is more equitable, and so that democracy, representative democracy, is more personal? So that might be another way to help with all these other problems that we're seeing in that. And so, although it seems like a really bizarre idea to seek a path towards more personal democratic representation, I'm just curious, is that something that gets floated around Congress? Is everyone just too vested in maintaining their own power base?
You know, it's the 435 members. It's not locked in stone.
I know it's not.
I suppose, I mean, it's been that way since I've been around, but probably take an act of Congress to change that. There's no, I've not heard any discussion about doing that. We're going to have, I think, a vote in September about allowing Puerto Rico to have a plebiscite to see if they want to join. And I think if they did, I think they'd add not just one member of Congress, but probably 3 or 4 House members in addition to the 2 senators, if they became the 51st state. But I suppose at that point they could look at whether they would raise the number, but it's still going to be over 700,000 per district. I mean, it take a pretty. I mean, you got office space, you got all those different things.
Well, I mean, I don't think it should be about office space. You'd figure that out. But the fact of the matter is that there are people very entrenched against it. I happen to sit on the committee that just did the Puerto Rico, reported it out last week. And I mean, it was Republicans, but who are very clear that they are not going to support anything that, and it's probably true that the larger states have larger urban areas and probably lean towards being Democratic, and people they've been articulate. They've said it in committee. This is going to create more Democratic seats, more Democratic senators, and we are totally opposed. And I think, you know, I haven't gone in and done the population analysis, but I suspect that there will be people that it would become political about which party would get more seats, and it's just going to be a challenge.
Of course, you're not going to know how those are redrawn.
Yeah, and then you don't. I mean, who gets additional seats would be based on census or pop. It's a complicated, and I don't know if you could just do a Congress if it would take I've got to go look.
Stay tuned. That's the
Yeah,
answer.
we'll both
Stay
go
tuned.
look, but I can tell you, having just sat through the Puerto Rico, how intense it became.
And I think I saw another hand back here.
This is where my wife would raise her hand.
I'm
But
not,
she's
I'm not
here today.
Amy.
Yeah, no, I know she's not here.
That's okay. Gary Kushner. Courageous votes in Congress are few and far between. It's very easy to vote a party line, one way or the other. Fred, you took a very courageous vote early in 2021 to impeach, for the second impeachment of President Trump, as one of, I believe, only 10 Republicans in the House to vote for impeachment. Is it that there's a lack of courage in Congress to take those hard against party line votes that we had seen in the past? I mean, if you think back to the Watergate era, it was the Republicans that went to Nixon and said, resign or you will be impeached and convicted. How does courage play into all of this?
Well, it does, a little bit. And I've had more than just one of those votes as well, where I get people protesting in my office or death threats, and we've released a couple of them. Debbie's had a lot of death threats as well. In fact, one time we actually joked that it was the same guy because he was using the same language and he did more than just my initials. But, you know, for that particular vote, it was always viewed as a vote of conscience. And, you know, we had a Republican conference a night or two beforehand, and, you know, I actually told people how people voted in Michigan. This was before the January 6th. Remember, the vote on impeachment was what, I think the 13th of January or something like that. But we had, when we did the January 6th, which we all know about, I spoke at the conference on the night of the 5th, and I told, you know, my 200 colleagues, Republican colleagues, how Michigan voters voted absentee, because I had voted absentee. And it wasn't what Trump had described in that they mailed people ballots. No, you got an application. You had to fill out the application, you had to submit it, the clerk had to verify your date and your signature, your date of birth, address and signature before they would send you the ballot. And I brought my ballot application, absentee ballot application, that I got from the Trump campaign. They mailed it to me too. And it was even pre-printed with the St. Joe city clerk and the address on Broad Street. And, you know, it's, you know, Dropbox, it makes it convenient to drop by. And that's where I dropped my parents' ballot off for tomorrow's election last week. It's 154,000 votes. And so, you know, everyone sort of came to their own conclusion, and frankly, I was a little surprised by some of the 10, I won't tell you who, but it was a vote of conscience, and none of us regret that vote. We're all very close now. Some of us were close before too, but it's, you know, you have those defining votes. I had the same vote when I served with John Dingell. He and I actually voted exactly the same way on the '94 crime bill. We both voted against including the assault weapon ban as part of it because of the way that the definition was, and change one thing and all of a sudden it's different, or you change it from the AR-15 to the AR-36, I mean, whatever it might be. But we also knew that we needed to have more support for our law enforcement. And we had a number of shootings here in Kalamazoo. Had some town meetings, and I knew that we needed more resources, not less. And so even though that amendment was included, and though I'd voted against it with John Dingell, the two of us both voted for the bill because we knew it was going to do something that was positive. I got, you know, there were like, I don't know, 20 Republicans that might have voted for it then. I can remember some of them. But it was the right vote. You know, I look at the surge in Iraq. I'd been to Iraq a couple of times. And I wasn't happy that it wasn't a coalition of countries coming together. It was just us, and there were a number of failures, and it was a sense of Congress. It wasn't a mandate. And our own generals said no. And yet, I stood with our generals who testified. So we all have those votes, and you get pillared for sure by some. Debbie's had those on other issues as well. But you have to decide. You know, it was like last week when we had this vote on chips. If we had had the vote a couple of months ago, I think we would have had 80 to 100 Republicans that would have voted for it. Remember, it passed with big majority in the Senate a year ago as well as a second time. But all of a sudden, politics got involved and people started saying, no, we can't give Biden a win. Oh, we can do a better bill next year. Inflation's an issue. We all know that. There's a little more spending, but the question is going to be, what's the long term going to be? And you just could see that number drop from 80 to 100 to 60. You had a senator come over who was a big leader of it in the Senate, former House member, and I chatted with him on the floor. And I said, it's 40 to 60, but if this thing languishes, the number's going to get down. And all of a sudden, we were holding on to see if we could actually pass it to get it done. And it would have been a terrible thing. So not only would we have lost the industry, but just think what the market would have done. I can remember when we didn't do the TARP bill, and the market dropped 700 points. That was a lot back then. But this would have been a terrible signal. And, our leadership broke some folks. And we had some that were leading proponents for it, both behind the scenes and in our Republican conference on the House floor. And as I told them, they'll break you if they can, and they did. And we ended up with 25, and only
24.
5 of us. Oh yeah, somebody changed at the end. There was 25, and then somebody changed at the end. Only 5 of us, Republicans, voted for it. So if you watch, and you have, Gary, I know you watch the Congress and the clock ticks down, you got 15 minutes, but the vote's not over till the gavel comes down. At 0 time on the clock, there were only 5 Republicans that had voted for it. The other 19 didn't come on until after the Democrats got to 218 to pass before they voted for it. In essence, willing to be broke if they had to be in some of those cases that were there. So it's just, hey, both sides. I mean, that's the story as we relate to just the big vote that we had just this last week. And thank God we got it done, because it wouldn't have happened. The argument, oh, we'll just do it next year. We have 7 full legislative days between now and the election. 7. Not counting the day that we come back for votes, first day of the week, votes at 6:30, or the last day of the week that we have before we go home. 7 full legislative days left. There's no way you would have done a bill like this that fell apart into pieces, and to try and figure out how do you get 60 votes again in the Senate and get it done, and it would have been a mess. It would have been a year of watching these jobs leave our state and nation.
So, final question. Debbie, as you look at this controversial world, do you see the solution being from Congress and the presidency down, or is the solution to our polarization more likely to come from the grassroots?
It's both. It's not just, you can't just look at us and tell us that we got to talk to each other. Every American needs to worry about their democracy. They need to, and Congress is a representative body. So it represents the population of what you're seeing. See how easy it's become to bully people online. See what's happening to our young children in schools. See how easy it is. I mean, just look at what's happening in our schools and in shopping centers and movie theaters, that people are going in with assault weapons. All of us have a responsibility to treat each other respectfully, to demand civility, to take the tone down, to object to what you're seeing on social media and to elect people that represent what you want to see. But I think it needs to start in our communities where we need to stand up to this lack of respect, treating each other with dignity that needs to happen. And you're electing people who behave the way that you don't like, but it also is happening in too many places in all of our lives.
I just might add just one little thing that crosses my mind as it relates to your question. One of the things that I do, and actually Debbie did, we walked in, we talked about it, a couple people that are here. Until COVID, I visited a school every week. It wasn't just a Western or KVCC. It was a middle school, a high school. One of your cable folks here, Monica, she went to Lloyd Norris. I went to Lloyd Norris a bunch of times, speaking to classes. Those kids aren't voting for you then, but you can be yourself. You can tell them what a legislator is, what it is that you're doing, what you're working on. And it's amazing the people, so I did that for, a few years, I'll confess. But the impact that you have, and you can tell right away the quality of the education, the teacher, and again, Western, what a wonderful teaching program you have here. But the students, the capability of those kids and where they're headed, and you hopefully incite them then to be involved in their community. Maybe they'll run for state rep or Congress. Maybe they'll run for township supervisor or school board or do something that it may change their life. And, you talk about bullying and, when I was, we had Parkland shooting, and I spoke that day here in Kalamazoo. I was at Portage Central, and I did an assembly there. And while I was there was a live shooting drill. Well, I had never had that when I was in school. Debbie and they were sort of the same age.
He's older.
Yeah, but, again, going to, and Debbie came back the next day or two, and I hosted an event. We had Sheriff Fuller, and we had some of our state legislators, I think all of our education superintendents, and we talked with the student council. What can we do? And we went to a couple schools, and then I went and did the same thing in Debbie's district as well, because you can't learn. And, these Parkland kids, and I got to know some of the survivors, just like I did Columbine, and, it just breaks your heart what goes on. But you just have to be engaged. You have to be listening, and you say, how can you work together? And, so pretty big issue, but if we hadn't had the connection to actually kids in the school and teachers, and, they were very much against having guns and for teachers, which is an issue that we've dealt with a little bit, but, that helped us, I think, particularly as we wrote the legislation that the problem solvers were very much involved in on gun safety and school safety, that the president signed into law just 2 weeks ago. It didn't have the assault weapon ban. That was a different thing, but this was, again, another sort of going back to Gary's question, vote of conscience, standing up and actually seeing something, I think, that will, in fact, reduce school violence across the country, probably already has.
Wonderful questions, provocative, and then modeling such civility here, which is what this whole thing is all about. I want to actually pick up on what you had mentioned, which is it starts with all of us. This isn't just something that happens in DC and magically the rest of us all sort of snap to the line and love each other and connect with each other. And so we now have an opportunity for each of you all to be matched in a conversation with someone who is politically different from yourself. We're not doing it right this second, so don't panic. And as a call to action, following Dave Isay's visit to Kalamazoo here a few months ago, we're delighted to announce that Kalamazoo has been selected as a One Small Step community. And One Small Step is this initiative initiated by StoryCorps to help people across difference have conversations in a structured way with people that are different from themselves. So I'm going to invite Dave Isay to say a little bit more about it on the video.
Hello, Kalamazoo and West Michigan. I'm Dave Isay, founder and president of StoryCorps. I'd like to invite you to be part of StoryCorps' One Small Step. This effort is an opportunity for people with different political beliefs to come together and better understand each other. When you sign up, you'll be matched for a 50-minute conversation with a stranger who has different views to talk about your lives, not about politics. This isn't about winning debates or changing people's minds. It's about the shared journey to understand that we have more in common than divides us. Join us in taking one small step toward a better future for our country.
Thank you, Dave. And the way to do this is there's a little application process that if you're interested in doing this, you would fill it out, and you can find that on the back of the program. Yes, you want to hold that up? There's a little QR code on the back of the program that will give you access to this short little application. And there are going to be a select number of interviews. One Small Step will be here to host these interviews in September. If you're not selected in this first round, you'll automatically be added to this national list that continuing to facilitate conversations virtually across the country with people who are different from themselves. So I hope everyone will seriously consider, not that you haven't had a chance to talk to someone who's different from you, but there's really a beautiful way that One Small Step curates these conversations and makes them, I think, a little bit different than maybe what you've had at the Thanksgiving table. So let's all take one small step together. Please watch the the WeTalk website for more information about what's coming this fall, including some folks will be here, Ibu Patel and Manu Meal. They are two bridge builders, I would say, and they will be here in the fall to share some of their perspective with you. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
So I just want to thank our great guests, and could you join me in a round of applause for them? Thank you both for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.